This is part 4, which I like to call expanding. Sometimes plants get tight in their shoes, so we got to put them into new shoes called repotting. And the other thing is too, you can get free plants. I'm going to show you how. But first off, let's get right into repotting. So often when we see a plant that all of a sudden starts to look a little bit more weaker, a little bit more tired, maybe it's not as vigorous, and we've had it for some time, it needs to be repotted. I'm only going to give you the example here with this small little pothos that's a little tiny 2.5-inch pot that all of a sudden its shoes have become a little bit tight and it needs to grow. So what do we need first off, and how do we do it secondly? First off, what we're going to need is a new pot. And generally what you're going to do is to go up 1 pot size. That's a 2.5-inch, this is a 4-inch, so I'm going up 1 pot size. If you had a 10-inch pot, you go to a 12. If you had a 12-inch pot, you go to a 14. You kind of get the idea overall. You go to the garden store, you go to your home improvement store, and you say, wow, there's a lot of pots out there. There's ceramic, there's clay, there's plastic, there's fiberglass, there's iron, there's a whole bunch of different ones out there. Clay is a really nice pot, by the way. It actually has the ability to even release some moisture, and the plant's roots can breathe through it. The clay, though, if it's left outdoors during the winter months and we get water in there and it freezes outside, it'll crack that pot. It has drainage. Most clay pots do have drainage. And if you buy too big of a pot for a plant, what'll happen is that plant will actually drown inside that pot. It doesn't want to go too much up because it can't take all that available moisture that you're going to put into the soil, and it'll actually stay wet for too long and then kill the plant. There are some plants out there, like even aloe vera, that like to have their feet tight. Aloe vera and jade are 2 examples of plants that rarely need to be repotted. So the key is just go onto Google, type in, does my plant need to be repotted? And you'll see, if you put down the variety of your plant, which ones like to stay a little bit more in tight shoes, and the others out there that need to be repotted more often. Next, what we have to do is make sure that we have a pot that has a hole. If it doesn't have a hole, I'm going to show you why we need a hole, but if it does have a hole, that means it has drainage. Drainage is key. If a plant or pot does not have a hole and or drainage, I got that guy over here, what we would do is to add drainage is we would fill maybe the 1/3 of the base of that pot with either some stones that'll weight it down. You could even use old water bottles. We could use styrofoam pieces. But really what we want to do is to create an area where water will sit away from the soil and away from the roots of the plant. So drainage. Pot is what we need, 1 pot size up, then we need drainage. Next, what we need is what's called potting soil. This is an example of potting soil, which has the little white pellets in there, which is perlite. Potting soil has the ability to absorb moisture and then dry out. A garden soil out there is just too heavy. So if you were to go buy a bag of garden soil for just a few dollars, just too heavy. You need to get a potting soil. And some potting soils out there are formulated for different interior plants. You can get an orchid soil, that has more bark chips in it. You can get a cactus soil that actually has more sand in it. You can get an African violet soil that's a little bit heavier of a mix to keep them a little bit more moist. These soils all formulated for success. The key is though, with the potting soil, there is no fertilizer in there, and that's why we need to fertilize. Now the next step is repotting. So we have our little plant that's here, boom. We have our pot, boom. We have our potting soil. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a little bit of soil to the base of that bottom of that pot so that we're going to make it almost the same height when it's planted. We're going to remove the plant. And often when I find plants that have been in there for a while, sometimes you have to squeeze the sides to remove that plant. And other times what you're going to need to do, some pots you even need to cut with a pair of scissors. It just switches right out. The roots are there. We're just going to take the bottom and just break the bottom roots off a little bit. And we're going to pop that guy right in so it's just at soil level. Then what we're going to do, I'll just slide him over here, is we're going to put some other additional potting soil around the sides so that it's just beautifully done. That we have, it's going to be all, that extra soil is going to give extra space for the roots to grow in. We're just going to firmly press down so that it's nice, that soil's tight and compacted in there. So we're going to put it down. And then the final step after we've done this is we just need to give it a little bit of a watering. The reason why we're watering, and Amanda asked me the question, why do we have to water? The reason why we're watering is we're reducing the amount of shock that it goes through. Often what I'll do is, you can see with this potting soil, how it kind of clumps together there, it's moist. So if you don't have moist potting soil and it doesn't clump together, what I would recommend is watering your potting soil even before you do the repotting. This is a great thing to do in the kitchen because that mess can be just there on the counter and you have the sink that's right there. But watering it is key. And after that, it's going to reduce the amount of shock. And there you go. You got a beautiful little pothos plant that's going to get to be a bigger pothos plant that in time we can take some cuttings off of and create more free plants. And that's the next step. So I partnered up this clay pot because it has a hole in the bottom with a saucer. Boom. So the saucer, of course, is going to catch water. But the other thing that you may notice is you're thinking it needs water, but if there's still water in the saucer, it doesn't need water. That plant should be able to draw that water up through the saucer into the soil. So if you see water in the base of your saucers, you don't need water at all. Still let it have some time to dry out. And a reminder, if you have a hole in the bottom of your pot, you need something to catch the water because you don't want it to go on your hardwood floors. And if you do see some water in the bottom of that saucer, you have two options. You can either leave it there because it'll evaporate and then create humidity around the plant, or if you want and that water looks a little bit stagnant, like it's old, empty it out and let that plant dry out. So let's talk about expanding and creating free plants. So how can we do that? There are some easy plants out there to do some free plants. Of course, the spider plant, but today we're going to talk a little bit about ivy. Here's a plant that we just got from the garden center. Some beautiful long stems that are coming out, and we can create several free plants with this guy. First thing that we can do is we can take some of these, and you're always going to go to the new growth, and you're going to take what's called a cutting. And the reason why we take a cutting off of this plant is we can create new plants. And it's super easy. You can either put this in a rooting hormone, or what you can do is you can just stick it directly in the soil. And what I would recommend is not to stick one in every pot. I would recommend to stick 2 or 3 into each pot. We're going to keep those moist, but not overly wet. And within about 4 weeks' time, they're going to create a root, and we're going to start to have new plants that we can then pot up year after year to create bigger plants overall. When it comes to another method that you can do to create free plants, it's what's called pinning the plant. And by pinning the plant, all you're doing is you're taking the mother plant. We have a little pot of soil that's right beside it. And we're going to put that in, and we're just going to press down, and we're going to cover that with soil. And what will happen is that area where we covered with soil will eventually set a root. It takes about 3 to 4 weeks. As soon as it sets a root, what we can do is then cut the stem off here, and we create another plant. This can easily be done with ivies, it can be done with spider plants, it can be done with pothos, with any trailing plant. That pinning, super easy. And that same tip is what you could do even in your garden with euonymus. Easy ways to create free plants for you. And then the other way to create a free plant is when you go to the garden center and you look to a pot. What we can see here with this Dracaena marginata is there's actually 2 plants in this pot. So for the $15 price of 1 plant, we could take this home, divide it, and create 2. There you go. There's always a way to create free plants. Always look out for free plants. A few of my favorites, Sansevieria. They always have like little babies coming out the side. Easy. Many succulents as well. You can easily get those with Dracaena marginata. And sometimes what you'll see is even those little spider plants, boom, there's little babies hanging right off the side. So bougainvillea, hibiscus, oleander. Those are 3 plants that in the summer you may actually have outdoors. And they're fantastic. They do well outdoors. And then your question is, can I bring them in to overwinter? Indeed you can. Bougainvillea flowering in December indoors is something that's not uncommon. It's actually something that can easily happen even at your own home. The key is when bringing them indoors, we're bringing them indoors before we have the risk of frost, before that temperature dips below 0. So that could be late September to October, depending upon where you live. Before we bring them indoors, we want to inspect and make sure that there's no insects. And if you can, do a quick spraying with an insecticidal soap, like a Bug B Gone, not bringing them indoors. Once we bring them inside, and when we do bring them inside, we want to make sure they're in a bright room, either west or south facing light. We only want to water them when they're dry, and then really not fertilize until March when those daylight hours get longer. Every once in a while, check for insects, give a spraying if you see a problem, and that's it. And when you can put them back outdoors is when the risk of frost has left, and that could be mid-May to almost June, depending upon where you live. So that is a little bit about bougainvillea, hibiscus, and oleander, those tropical plants that you put outdoors and bring in so that you have them year after year.